Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Amplifier Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Don Cooper, with my wonderful and much smarter co-host, Mallory Murphy. Mallory, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Don. Excited to have this podcast episode going.
So today, in this episode, we're going to start to tie things together from our previous episodes on all of the aspects of action. Previously we talked about the action instinct, the action skills, formulas, and sequences. But what we're really trying to do is just help our listeners see and think about this all differently from the traditional way of how they do things. So, let's dive into this episode, talk about some of the common pitfalls that almost all teams get wrong with the traditional job description approach. And how they can fix it. So, for our audience, we're going to talk about some strategies that are going to help you turn chaos into streamlined success. We're going to dissect how you can align roles for individual strengths to really just boost your team's productivity. And when you get this right, it just feels like things flow. And when you get it wrong, there's friction. And so everyone who hears this, when you think about a team where you're getting friction, where you're getting obstacles, following this simple step-by-step process can help you dial your teams in to really drive productivity. But more than that, I think it drives team satisfaction and team cohesion, and ultimately you just get a lot more people engaged because you have focused on dialing them in where they can make the greatest contribution. And as a team leader, as a manager, as an entrepreneur, you're going to be able to uncover your team's genius, and it'll just be a lot more fun. I mean, one of my close coaches, Joe Polish, has this really simple analogy that you have two choices with your team, with your company. You can have a half business or you can have an ELF business. His half business stands for hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. An ELF business is easy, it's lucrative, and fun. In this episode, we're going to uncover what makes your business half and how you can get it to ELF. Easy, lucrative, and fun. So let's dive in, Mallory.
Awesome. So Don, you've experienced a lot of these challenges over your career and what's worked and what's not worked. What are some of the most common challenges companies face when team roles aren't aligned with individual strengths and instincts?
Well, I think speaking from experience and for the audience, I've had to figure out this process because of all of the struggle and the grind and the feeling of a half business. And ultimately, the traditional way of doing things causes this issue, right? And, the traditional job description and the HR practices of write me a job description and I'm going to interview them for skills ultimately creates at best, a mediocre team. But what happens? Well, you get balls being dropped. You get opportunities missed. You get a lot to some serious degree of disengagement from the team. But one of the things that I notice, with the traditional job description, even for companies who operate on EOS who don't really grasp what they're trying to do here, the accountability chart inside of EOS is not just a place where you would list people's responsibilities. That's just another word for the same traditional thing. What I see is if you give someone a list of 10 accountabilities, and you really haven't dialed that in to their action instincts and their unique action skills, what you get are a lot of things done poorly, or and the more obvious thing is, you get people who literally are not doing the things on their accountability chart, because people will naturally move towards what they're good at, what they enjoy doing. And so if there are things they don't like, they're not good at, they don't enjoy doing, it's procrastination. But 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 the way procrastination really manifests itself that kills productivity is there's all kinds of things that people should be doing and aren't doing. And it's the not doing list. And when you go through this process, you find out, and you look at someone's accountability chart, you find out that person doesn't do that, doesn't do that, doesn't do that, and doesn't do that. Oh, and guess what? It's not getting done. And that's why you struggle in a business to really create momentum, to really create scale. It ends up in, you can diagnose this all kinds of ways, right? But ultimately, the thing that I see is not just some things getting done maybe poorly, but lots of things that need to get done to really create, team productivity and momentum, just not getting done, not getting across the finish line. That's, and I uncover this almost every day when I work with clients, and even inside of our own teams, as I help our team leaders sort of dial in these processes better. Ultimately, I find out that things are not finished. There's things not implemented. They get them 70% of the way there, and they're waiting for someone else to pick up the ball. And it creates a whole series of, in EOS terms, series of rocks that got done but didn't get implemented and integrated in a way that they create momentum in the business. And so it's the not finished and the not doing list that I find are the most common pitfalls of people who are writing an accountability chart or writing a job description, and really not grasping that it is a systematic way to create productivity and to create bigger results, right?
And you've worked with clients before where when this hasn't been done, it set their whole business back years in terms of productivity and vision. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, I mean, even myself, even in our business, by not dialing this in, by just having hired this person for skills, gave them a list of responsibilities, and and then things weren't getting completed, and things, for most entrepreneurs, I think we have a vision that's, I kind of describe it like a jigsaw puzzle. And, and for your team, you may be describing a 90-day rocks and a 1-year plan and a 3-year painted picture, painted vision. But the team doesn't necessarily always grasp the jigsaw puzzle that the leader of the business has, and they shouldn't have to, right? They shouldn't have to understand all 1,000 pieces of the jigsaw puzzle in an entrepreneur's crazy 10-year vision, because when they're contemplating that, they get lost in how does it all fit together, when what they really need to do is focus on the 1 or 2 things that they got to do really well every week, and the 1 or 2 things they got to get done that are big objectives, aka EOS rocks, each quarter, and just have faith that each of those rocks is a piece of that jigsaw puzzle that is going to lead to that BHAG, that 10-year target of the business. And I had a conversation with one of our leaders just this week, and he didn't realize that I had a 25-year plan. And the reason that he didn't realize that is it's not something that EOS shares. It's something that we really learn about in Strategic Coach. But I have a very clear 25-year purpose. I wouldn't call it it's not a detailed plan. I think you'd have to be a maniac to have a detailed 25-year plan. But my 25-year purpose, my own personal purpose, sort of guides what I do in each activity. And when we start a new business like Amplifier, or we are doing certain things inside the innovator business, they all are contributing towards moving towards that 25-year thing. Um, but ultimately, when you don't dial your team into just getting them in the right, EOS calls it the right people in the right seats. But it's not a box checking exercise. It's really nuanced, right? Like, we're trying to get the right people in the right seats where they can be super successful. It's not the right seat for the seat that I need to fill. And I think one of the challenges for lots of people as they are thinking through how do I get the right people in the right seats is they're only thinking about what they need to get done and not how they get the most out of the team. And I think that's the shift that most leaders need to make is it's not about me, it's about them. And part of that is going to be uncovering that you might have some missing instincts, that you might have some missing skills, and then that becomes part of your strategy for the next person that you hire, or how do you deal with those missing instincts and capabilities in some format so that that gets done. The worst thing that you can do is recognize that you have a team that can't do what you need to get done and then blame the team. It's not the team's fault. It's the leader's fault.
Oh, exactly. And when you have personalities and you get those hurt feelings reports, you as a leader have to take that step back and go, what's best for the business? And what does the business need in order to be successful? And sometimes you have the people right in front of you. You just need to understand their instincts, their abilities, and put them to the right use, right? Because
Well,
having a gardener clean the pool is
yeah,
useless.
exactly. And I think it's really important for leaders to get clear um, on their intentions. And inside of EOS and LMA, one of the most important leadership things to be clear on is to act in the greater good of
Yeah.
the company, of the team, before yourself. Um, and so, a really important thing to communicate to get, and this comes back to culture. If your team understands that your intentions are good for them, they won't resist as much. They're still, you know, uh, I think, they're, remember that, entrepreneurial thinking requires you to think differently. And most people come into your team thinking bureaucratically, having all sorts of things they brought with them that they experienced somewhere else in some other job, and that you have to be really intentional to constantly communicate your beliefs, your values, and your intentions, um, because you have to assume people come with bureaucratic baggage. I think I'll trademark that.
I think that's a good idea.
Right? Because
I'll write that down right now.
bureaucratic baggage is the assumption that if people speak up, they're going to get in trouble. If they can't do the job as you described it, their job's at risk. Um, that, but if you're really trying to dial your team in, there's a couple of things that I think are really important for leaders to state. And one of my other coaches, um, his name is Keith Rosen, and I really just adore Keith's model for how he even introduces coaching. He says you have to enroll people in your good intentions, and so when you're coaching people, you've got to make sure that they understand that this is coaching and not accountability, and make sure that you separate the two. And I think the same applies for as you're trying to transform your team, that you need to state your good intentions, and you also need to state how you view the intentions of your team. And I don't know if this is true for all leaders and managers. But for me, I have a couple of simple beliefs about my people, and for the most part about all people, particularly if you hire them right through an effective hiring process. I believe that everyone wants to do good for the company, for your customers, and for themselves. And I believe that they are always trying to do their best, particularly if you've hired correctly with the right people based on culture, right? Based on a core values fit. And so if your people know that you have faith and belief that their intentions are always good, then and they understand that your intentions are about creating a stronger, more successful team, then you're halfway there to starting to make progress and eliminate resistance. Um, the resistance comes from bureaucratic baggage. They worked in a public company that all the processes and all the rules were all defined by someone at head office. They were given
Black and white.
Well, it's black and white. You are whether companies believe it or not, a lot of employees feel like a number. They feel like they don't matter. They've got to and we talked about this in a previous episode that most companies have their policies and their manuals, right? The rule books, which those rule books are not really designed in a way to help people be successful. Those are rule books of if you do this, you get into trouble. Or if you don't do this, you're going to get into trouble. It isn't about success. It's about punishment, right? And, buried in there's, as we talked about before, buried inside of these manuals, there are actions that you can set people up for success. And so, what are the pitfalls? I think you've got bureaucratic baggage. I think you have people who have job descriptions that are not really dialed into where those people can bring the most value. And that leads to key things not getting done, key things not being integrated, where one person does one piece, the other person does another piece, and it's never tied together to actually create momentum. And and it's someone who doesn't understand that their piece in the jigsaw puzzle connects with another piece to start to fill in the picture. And it's leadership's job to show people how this piece fits to this piece. I wouldn't go into the 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, but if you've got someone working on a training system and you've got someone working on supervisory competency, and they don't understand that these things need to get connected so that we can really help the organization grow and create momentum, then you have all these little siloed rocks. And I see a lot of siloed activities going on, even within companies that operate or try to operate on EOS.
It's funny that you say a couple of those things, because when I've been doing interviews, and we'll get into our hiring process and why it's so beneficial for this and overcoming some of these problems, I often tell people, if there's a better, more efficient way to do it, we want to know. We want you to change it, and let's talk. Let's make it happen. And they're just baffled. I have just spewed off some sort of Harry Potter spell that they've lost all words, and they have no idea what to say to this, because I wish this would have been the case. I have so many great ideas. And I'm like, that's what's working for an entrepreneurial business there is this opportunity for constant improvement. And when you get a job description done, how often does that job description or accountabilities, or you have a different name for it, how often should those things be reviewed? Because I often have heard people say, well, this was my job description when I was hired 10 years ago.
Yeah. First off, I call them countdown abilities. And that's not the same as, it's certainly not a job description, but I would say that and we won, even awards for this. but the count on ability chart is the elevated version of the EOS count on ability chart. Um, and all we're trying to do is dial that role in for each person on your team so they can be, to the greatest extent possible, dialed in for optimal performance. Right? In strategic coach calls it unique ability teamwork. And what I've sort of figured out is that in order to get there, you really got to dial in each person's count on ability chart. And that comes into, not a list of responsibilities, but a list of things that I need to count on you to do. That you're going to be my go-to person for these 4, 5, 6, 8, or 10 things. Mallory's my person for that. And there's no question I don't do it because she does it 10 times better than me and she loves doing it. And you and I are a great example of dialing that in, right? And it comes down to, how do you get there? Well, you've got to uncover people's unique skills, their the unique abilities, as strategic coach calls it. You've got to look at that list of count on abilities and make sure that what you've got on there is really leveraging people's action instincts. And when it's not, it's so obvious. It's so obvious. I was working with a team last week who was really trying to really drive team effectiveness. And they had, until recently, they didn't have a strong leader. They actually had what I call an abdicator. And that team didn't understand how that team hadn't even until recently really seen their accountability chart. And so they finally got the accountability chart on paper. And then I helped them sit down, and we hadn't even gone through the action skills unique ability process to really uncover that part for them yet. But all we did was look at, here's what you want this team to do, and here are their instincts. And I looked at, and I helped them see, you got to struggle with one team member because you're frustrated that they're not documenting processes. And then you had another team member who, when you looked at their accountability chart, about 50% of the 10 things that were on there had to do with creating and owning processes and organizing documentation and creating structure inside of IT. And this person had a follow-through action instinct of 3. And
what does that mean?
Well, what it means is they resist, somewhat rebel against existing structure. They're not going to even, they don't have an instinct to even work with the structure that is in place. They are somewhat counteractive to it all. They're certainly not going to be the person to initiate and create systematic ways of doing things. Now, there's nothing wrong with that instinct if it's applied correctly. Right? That person also had I believe a 7 quick start. So they were very innovative. And so they can contribute to, how can we make this process simpler, faster, easier? But her responsibilities were listed as creating all this structure. And how did it turn out? Nothing was getting done.
How was it feeling?
What's that?
You've got an emotional response to that as well, that trickles out into the organization.
Yeah, well, I think when someone has a whole bunch of accountabilities that are totally against the grain, that are not dialed into their unique abilities, it creates resistance, it creates frustration, it creates sort of attitude, disengagement, and ultimately it looks like, it feels like a big lack of accountability. I think for a manager who doesn't recognize what's happening there, it looks like an attitude problem.
Yeah.
But it's not an attitude problem. It's It's an accountability chart problem, it's an instinct problem, and you've not set this person up to really leverage how much they can really contribute to the organization. And so it's not the person, it's the leader who has not considered, how do I leverage this person most effectively? The other person on this team had a 4 on follow through, just like me. And they were also tasked with documenting processes, and it wasn't happening. As I said earlier, things weren't getting done. Like, it was the not doing list. And when I looked at it, I went, well, when you give that person a blank sheet of paper, nothing will happen. And their instinct predicts it.
Yeah.
Yet, when you hand this person a first draft of a process, within days, they're like, hey, I know how to make this better. And all of a sudden, they quickly come out with version 2 that says this is a better, faster, easier process that will really speed things up. Now, how do you go from someone who is doing nothing to someone who is offering value, saying we can make this faster, better, cheaper, quicker? And the only thing was leveraging how their instinct works in teamwork, because someone else had to initiate writing the initial draft and then said, here, tell me how to make it better. And as soon as you gave that person a step-by-step process for how something had to get done that they were involved in, they could quickly go, you know what, we should fix this part. And so it's mind-boggling when you see it happen in real life. And when you point that out to leaders, all of a sudden they start seeing the explanations for the behaviors that they see on the team. But if you just give people a list of accountabilities, either half of it doesn't get done, which was really what was happening, and then when you lean in to start pushing on why isn't this getting done, you get pushback, you get attitude, you get lack of accountability, because they look at that and it just feels, if you give someone who is a 3 on follow through, which is this sort of resistant, structure, and particularly someone who's that way and a quick start, they're way more like, they have an instinct to kind of wing it, to be a multitasker, to be a fast problem solver, but not necessarily to systemize it. But they have an instinct that can get stuff done. And if you can figure out how they get stuff done, and then somebody else captures their genius and says, let's standardize this, all of a sudden you get way more engagement. And so how do you take, an innovator instinct and leverage it? Well, it's not garbage, right? It's, this person can figure out how to do stuff fast. They can move quick, they can adapt, but someone else needs to go, hey, how did you do that?
And you and I have nailed that in leveraging your innovation with my strategic planning, because
absolutely.
I've learned that you need to talk it out. If I say, hey, Don, business needs you to provide
I've
this.
got, compared to the 2 people that we were working with last week, I have some of those instincts, but I have some different instincts as well. And so with the one person, I have a similar instinct for follow through. I'm a 4. But I know how to leverage it, right? I need a draft of something. Give me your 80% approach, whatever it is, and I can quickly say, tweak this, fix that, fix that, and let's go, right? Give me a blank sheet of paper and I will procrastinate. It just feels against my grain. And so I can't be the initiator, but I can be the person who can quickly dial something in to make it better. And whether that's a contract, a proposal, a process, a PowerPoint, a website, doesn't matter. Show me what you've got, and I'll give you my coaching and my feedback on how to make 5 things better to really make this pop a bit more. And in Strategic Coach, we call that the 80% approach. I need someone else's 80% approach, and then we can move fast. But I'm also a quick start. I'm a 7 quick start. But the difference for me is a couple things, right? One is I've indoctrinated myself for my whole life in figuring out how to drive performance and productivity for myself and for others. So I have a want to change. And so not everyone does, right? So those individuals didn't understand what they were feeling, experiencing. It was just sort of resistance. Um,
The leaders give them permission to,
well, they
to
have to.
ask for these things too, right?
They
Because you
have
talked
to.
about intentions. Well, what about permission?
Well, yeah, I think intention should lead to empowerment, but it needs to be communicated a lot, and it needs to be communicated in a way that leans into that person's instincts, right? If you have someone who is not a seven quick start like me, who
I'm a
isn't
two.
right, so if someone isn't driven to create change, to test, to experiment, you know, you're a two, which means you want to stabilize what works right now, and so inside of that, you can make that work, right? If I'm trying to create change, which I always am, right? Always.
Yeah,
Um,
always.
you know, but the way you communicate and lean into how do other people contribute to that, your instinct is to stabilize what works. And so in that context, if we understand that about each other, I could say, hey Mallory, I want to make this big change. And
Great.
right, right, and let's do this and this and this. And we had an example where I sent you an ask to set up a 2-day workshop for one of our teams in a couple of weeks to really dial some things in. Lots of change that has to be required. However, inside of all that change, about 80% of what we need to change is based on fundamentals that we've already established, right?
Yeah.
And so your job is to take, hey, I want to take this to the next level. Your job is to take what we already have and make it simple and structured so we're keeping what works and we're building on it. And it's important in the language that people use. Like a quick start like me needs to understand that a stabilizer like you can't hear, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Goodness no.
The baby is the 80% that is already working. My innovation is what we're doing to add on to it. And if you break up responsibilities like that inside of any project, you stabilize all the things we have in place that are working, and then here's how we want to improve upon it. And just that communication changes how you can problem solve on these teams, right? So, it's a great big problem to solve, and it's simple, but it's not easy, because the fundamental thing that needs to change for people to solve this people performance issue, which is what it is, right?
And
Is
EOS states that one of those problems that you're having is it a people issue, right?
It's a people issue. I think it's a people issue first, and then it's a process issue. And and people, if you don't get the people side of this right, the process won't matter. Like,
Exactly.
if I write a process that says, here's how it's got to be done, but
That's nice.
it doesn't take into account who has to do it and how they're wired, the processes are just going to be bureaucratic. They're not actually going to create extra, effectiveness, right? And so for leaders, I think that the key message about the problem to solve is it's a people issue, to dial in the effectiveness of your team using, to create a countdownability chart that takes into account, the things you need to get done, the instincts of the people and their unique skills, so you can dial in what you're actually going to say. Mallory, here's what I'm counting on you for. And can it be perfect? No, it's not about perfection. If I can get 80% of your countdownability chart dialed in to what you're great at, what you love to do, and what I need done, we win.
Absolutely.
Most of the time, a job description is about what the company wants done, not taking into account anything to do with the team member. And so you go and do an interview, and the person needs to put on a performance that, yes, I'm organized, and yes, I'm a good communicator, and yes, I'm good at change, and baloney.
I'm
Right?
telling you what you want to hear.
Well, and so people say that in an interview, and I uncover that it cannot possibly be true because I can see your action instincts. And you cannot be a change agent when you're a 2 on Quick Start. It's not possible. You just won't do it, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't dial in that person to really be effective. And when you're hiring, you can be more selective. You can be looking for someone who fits the instincts of the job, right? We have that count on ability hiring process. But when you have existing team members who are valuable, you got to stop trying to force a fit.
When you've
You,
got a great quote from one of your other coaches, Don Sullivan, that talks about problem.
yeah, well, I think that where all this starts for leaders, for managers, for entrepreneurs is, and we've talked a lot about these concepts, but the fundamental problem with the people issue and count on abilities is the problem is never the problem. The problem is that you don't even know how to think about the problem because you're thinking with bureaucratic structures. The bureaucratic baggage that you brought, that you're bringing to the job, brings bureaucratic thinking. And the bureaucratic thinking is, I've got a team of 5 people. Here's what I got to get done. You do this, you do this, you do this. I don't really care if you're good at it or not good at it. Go get some training. And and Dan Sullivan says, like I said, the problem is not the problem. The problem is you don't even know how to think about the problem. And Dan has another another statement that I think is really important for people to hear. Is it better to focus in and uncover what people are uniquely great at, or is it better to uncover what people are really weak at and get them a bunch of training? And so if you really dial your team in to their unique strengths and you don't focus on their weaknesses, you get a really strong, cohesive team as you put 3 or 4 people together and really use this with each person to have 4 people who have really dialed in count-on abilities. It'll give you 2 things, right? You'll get a really strong team, and you'll have a really clear picture based on the weaknesses, the incompetencies, the instincts that are missing, to describe the next person you need to hire to make this team even stronger again. You can do that, or you can be critiquing and giving feedback to your team about getting better at the things they're weak at. And what happens with 1 year, 2 years, 5 years of spending time investing in training people on their weaknesses instead of having a really strong, unique strengths team? You have a bunch of people who have slightly better weaknesses.
So we've diagnosed this. So many businesses, including our own, has this problem
Yep,
that teams.
everyone has it because everyone is thinking about it, in the wrong way.
So how do we solve this? We've talked about the common pitfalls. Talked about the problems itself and how to diagnose it. How do I solve it? How do I take this team where I've acknowledged whether it's I've got an attitude problem that we're realizing is actually just not using strengths and abilities properly, or we've got a new role that we need to hire for. How do we solve this and create productivity in a quick, easy, systematic way?
Well, have you ever gone to the doctor and said, "Doctor, I've got a sore stomach," and did they say, "Here's a prescription," before they
Always.
even, well, before they've asked you any questions?
Oh, okay, yes, but no.
So there's another whole episode around healthcare that I won't get into here today. But the example of the doctor is when you go to the doctor with a pain or an illness, they do one thing, whether they do it well or not, but they do one thing before they prescribe. They diagnose. They have to, before I can fix you, and help you get healthier as a team, as a person, I need to diagnose what's going on. And so, what again, I'll come back to one of my coaches, Dan Sullivan, and progress in solving this, is all progress starts by telling the truth, understanding where you are with the team, so that you can start to make adjustments that are going to make progress. Remember, we're not looking for perfection, right? I think perfect inside of a unique ability teamwork and is 80%. 80% across that team would propel productivity through the roof compared to the traditional job description. And so we're looking for progress, and progress has to start by telling the truth. Truth comes from, let's diagnose this a little bit. And, there's a step-by-step way to do that, and you do it in your workshops. So,
Yeah.
walk us through the diagnose part of this a little bit.
Well, when we're in one of these workshops, and we've done it with our teams, we've done it with some clients, and the biggest thing that I love to watch is, like you said earlier, the empowerment. The intention of the workshop is very clear with the leader before we even walk in the room, that we want to make this team better. We want to make everybody happier. Because if I'm happy and I like what I'm doing, I'm going to be really good at it. If you say, here's some tasks, Mallory, I need you to do them. Okay, John, I can do them, but I think there might be somebody else who's got some better instincts or a better ability to do this. Can I work with them instead of saying, I'm not doing this, I suck at it, I don't want to? So how do we even know who to look for within our teams, within our companies? And when we walk into the room and we do this workshop, as we've talked about in other podcasts, we have everybody write down all of the tasks that they do, the good, the bad, the ugly, the things they love, the things they hate. And we map them out. And then we go through each one individually. Why do you hate this? Is it a lack of training? Is it a lack of support? Is it a lack of interest? What is the problem here? And when we do that, we can understand where the strengths are of all members of our team. And there's a lot of times where I will hold up a Post-it note and say, okay, Joe doesn't like this task. It's just going against everything he likes to do. Is there anybody on the team that likes to do? And I don't mean can do, because we're all capable of these things. We were all hired because we're capable. Who likes to do this? And sometimes you get somebody to raise their hand and be like, okay, great. Look at the leader. Is this something that we could have this person start to do or be a part of? Or nobody raises their hand and everyone's like, yeah, none of us. We all hate that. Okay, great. I like to put those Post-it notes in a whole different category. And I write new job description or accountability or new count on abilities needed. And all of these things that nobody likes to do, nobody wants to do, but all need to happen and are getting done, just not productively, become the next role that we need to hire for. So oftentimes that we get these teams, they're like, oh, we're all overworked, we're burnt out, we've got all these struggles, we need to hire somebody else. And usually, okay, well, this is what needs to be done. And it's a knee-jerk reaction, and it's very reactive.
It's almost always until you map out, you got a team of 4 or 5 people, and and it's sometimes not only just a bunch of stuff that they do that they dislike doing. It's also stuff that they should be doing and are not doing. The not doing list becomes part of this, right? When I look at it, even without the affect side, so when people say they don't like something, it's often they don't like it because it's against their instincts, right? And so instincts come, kind of trump affect, but most people understand I don't like it, I hate that, oh, it drives me crazy. And those are all very emotional descriptions. But
Yeah.
if you look at what does that task require, and you find out that it is something dramatically opposed to their action instincts. Someone, if you've got several activities that are not being done or that they do but they really dislike, um, it's almost several basis points apart on what kind of action instinct is required to really be effective at that. And I come back to the examples I was using earlier. If you've got a whole bunch of things with a couple of team members that involve creating systems and structure and getting organized, and you look and they, they'll almost always say, I'm not doing it or I dislike doing it. And then when you look at their action instincts, you can immediately go, I could have predicted that. I can
And it's
understand
true.
why, right? And it shows up, when you look at that mapping of all the action skills, and you then cross-reference it really quickly to instincts. You go, it's no wonder. Like, we're setting you up to do a bunch of things that you're not wired for.
Exactly. And when we
And
go through this
yep,
workshop, we do just that. It's one of the things that I love to do, to connect your action instincts and your Colby with the tasks, to so that I'm not the only one in the room who understands what this means, right? So we'll go through, okay, you affectively, emotionally, you don't like this task. Okay. You've said you don't have enough time, or you don't have enough knowledge or training, whatever the case is. Okay, what's your Colby tell us about this? What are your action instincts towards this task? And I get them to engage in that conversation, because when they understand what their action instincts are themselves, it helps them be reflective and empowered when they're looking at tasks and they're getting frustrated, right?
right.
And it's part of the process. As a leader, you need to be able to look at these things and understand it very quickly and identify it. And that's where I love helping the leaders. But I'm not also just there for the leaders. I want each individual on that team to feel empowered to come to the leader and say, okay, you've told me your intentions. You've told me that this is the vision that we have for the business and my role. We're sitting down in our quarterly or annual review, and we're going through all of my count on abilities. And I'm going to look at, Dawn, this task, I really don't like doing it. It makes me feel this way. But when I've looked at my action instincts, I realize that I feel this way because I'm not a quick start. You're asking me to create and jump and try all these different things. I can do it. I am capable of doing it, but it feels wrong and I'm
But it's a
procrastinating on
grind.
it. It's a grind. It's like
Yeah,
putting shoes on the wrong feet.
procrastination um, is a signal, right? That something is going on with your skills or your instincts that's saying, this just feels against my grain, right? Um, and I often take on some rocks because they got to get done because I have the skills to do it, but I procrastinate because it's got something to do with cleaning up messes and um, that other
Creating
people created,
structure.
and creating simpler structure. I'm way better wired to work with someone who likes to do that, and I can tell them what I want done as opposed to me doing it. And it's a slight nuance, but it can drive productivity through the roof. And it's why um, inside of our business, I'm hiring this new data person who I can work with, who loves to do the stuff that I want done, that I just, I'll procrastinate on, even though I know how to do it and I
You
want it
can do
done.
it.
I can do it, I want it done, and I won't do it because my instincts come first. And that's it's probably one of the things that maybe we'll talk about in another episode. But, instinct trumps knowledge, and instinct trumps attitude. Um, and it shows up all the time. And the way that it often shows up is procrastination. Right? If it's against your grain to have to dive in and do something that requires doing a whole bunch of organizing, for me, as an example, or for you to jump in and experiment and try a bunch of new things, it's not how you're wired, and so it shows up as procrastination. And so, how do you look at how do we do this differently, where someone else creates the idea and the change, and then it leverages your instinct with your fact finder and your your instinct for structure and your instinct to stabilize what's already there to really drive productivity. And that's the essence of what we're talking about here is thinking differently about the team. And it requires you to think differently because if you think linearly and you think bureaucratically that this is this person's job and this is this person's job and this is this person's job, and be damned with instincts or what they're uniquely great at, because you're focusing on what you want as a manager or what the company needs done. What I'll say to you is, here's the paradigm shift. You can get everything that you want as a leader manager, and you can get 2 to 4 times more done by making one simple shift in how you think about the problem. And instead of thinking about one person's list job description, look at the 40 things that need to get done by the team and treat it like a checkerboard. Treat it like horse trading, where what I really have an instinct to stay away from that shows up like I hate doing that stuff. When I say I hate doing something, it's almost always because I have an instinct that's different than that, right? But that doesn't mean I don't want it. So, and this as an example, managing my time and my calendar is something I want. It's something I know how to do, but I don't do because my instinct is just not to be that structured in doing it. So you do that stuff.
Or to commit to too much.
Right? And I always, and my quick start always commits to way too much. And so you've got to be a filter, keep me organized, and take on less. And so it works, but it needs to be applied to your team. So you got 40 different activities that a team needs to do. Stop thinking linearly. Diagnose the team based on their unique skills and their instincts, and then take that whole list of all the stuff we got to get done and start to just move things around so that you're getting as close as you can to here's the 70 or 80% focus that you can have that's really dialed in, and you and you and you. And there may be some things that are just totally against people's grain. Now, you're not going to make every job perfect, and that's not the intent, right? It's 80% approach. But there still might be some things that I got no one who has the instincts and the skills for these 10 things. Well, those 10 things become your next approach, which is I got to hire for it, or I got to eliminate it, or I've got to automate it, or I've got to outsource it. And I tend to have this attitude that there's a lot of stuff your people do that just ought not be doing, right? Peter Drucker said, and I'll paraphrase him, but the worst thing is to do something really efficient that ought not to be done at all, right? And there's
Absolutely.
lots of things that I'm spending 8 hours a day doing payroll. Well, let's not do that at all. How about we just automate it? How about we outsource it? How about we change the process so that it's now 2 clicks of a button? And so, but you can't get there. You can't get there to that if you try to fix processes before you dial in people's countdown abilities. What's going to happen?
I'm going backwards.
Yeah. If
Bureaucracy.
Well, 100%. I mean, we see it all the time when we ask people who are not dialed in their seat with their instincts and their unique abilities to, get processes ready. And I've seen extremes of it, right? No process at all, just blank sheets of paper because they won't start. To someone who doesn't understand, who writes an instruction manual on how to do something as opposed to what to do. And so processes can never be dialed in my view. They can't be simplified. They can't be they can't even, in some cases, they won't even be initiated. They won't be simplified, and therefore they cannot be followed by all if you don't focus on getting the right people in the right seats dialed in with their countdown abilities. Instincts, action skills, and then assigning what needs to get done, what you're going to count on them for based on those things. And so you need to take the team's accountabilities and put them on the wall and go, let's move things around so that we can become way more effective as a team.
Yeah.
Once you get that done, your work of simplifying and documenting processes that are followed by all will rapidly explode.
And when you've got those processes documented and followed by all, you've got increased productivity because everybody knows what to expect. And you're able to expand your business so much quicker because there's no more of, well, this person knows how to do this, so you have to talk to them, and we don't really have anything documented. You can't scale a business that way.
Yeah, well, I had three examples of people not thinking correctly about processes in the last week. In the one situation, I heard coming out of someone I was working with that, well, I do it this way, and they do it that way, and they do it that way, and it all gets done. It's like, sure, but is that scalable? Is that repeatable? Which way is the best way to drive productivity? If you take an hour to do something and someone else does it in 8 hours, is that acceptable? Right? It's got to be one process that is optimized so everyone does it the same way, or you will never be able to. You can't even sustain it. It's not even about growing your business. You can't even protect your business if someone gets sick and walks out the door if they have something that's in their head that isn't written down.
Right.
Right?
So we've got the processes, we've got the right people currently, we've got it all sorted out, we've diagnosed the problem, we've solved it. We're ready to hire and expand this team because now we are at a place of being scalable.
Yes.
What are the do's and don'ts in adding to this team now that we've got it where we want it to be?
Well, I would say the first thing is, don't try to clone everyone else, right? I mean, if you want to make great strides on a team, hire for what's missing, not
How do we do
hire
that?
for duplication, right? Well, you look at all of the accountabilities that you can't count on anyone for because they're against people's grain. They are, in terms of instinct, they are either incompetent or just basically competent activities. And you start to carve that out to form this new set of count on abilities that is for this new seat that is uniquely different from everyone else on the team. You're literally taking all the weaknesses of the team and turning it into, we need a person who has these weaknesses as a strength.
Can you repeat that for the people in the back? Because
Yeah, well,
that's so critical.
you take the weaknesses of your team and you turn that into a count on ability chart for the next hire where you're looking for someone who has that set of countdown abilities as their strength. You take my weakness and turn it into your strength. This is how you came to work with me.
Absolutely.
Right? And it needs to be applied to every team, everywhere, not trying to replicate. I see the mistake, the don't, is the idea that we need another member of the admin team. So let's take the existing, and I hear it even in different, even inside of our own company. I ask, what are the countdown abilities of these 5 people? Oh, they're all the same. Well, then they're not even being used, right? If you've got the exact same list of accountabilities for 2 different people, and you haven't taken into account their unique strengths and their instincts, you are not using this effectively. And so it's the weaknesses of the team that become the new role that you're looking for strength. And that's how you 4, 5, 10x the productivity of your team. And one of the things that is also a mistake, and I've seen it and I have to coach people through this, is you're hiring someone who has some new, unique strengths that you're looking for, and you ask people who are terrible at doing that work to do the action instinct assessment on it. So, here's a list of all these things that we as a team suck at, and you get people who are already suck at those things to describe how they would do it. Well, we already know how you would do it. right? And
You
so
don't.
you don't do it, and so you shouldn't be part of that process. So the people who should be assessing the instincts of a new role should be the hiring manager, the person who knows this is the person that I need to fix to make my team stronger. Um, then it can be someone who is equally, maybe not the hiring manager, but another leader or someone who really understands why we need these different capabilities. Someone who is really dialed into it. And then the only other person that should be involved in that is if you've got someone who is already doing something similar and you're looking for someone uniquely. But when you're first doing this, if you are looking for to turn weakness into strength, by definition, there's no one on your team who can really assess that. And so it shouldn't be someone on your team who sucks at these things who's part of that assessment, right? The hiring manager, someone who's familiar, and only add in another team member if they're doing something really similar and they're a top performer. But if you've got a sales role who's really good at nurturing existing accounts but sucks at prospecting, and you're trying to hire someone who is a really good prospector to bring more new opportunity in, that account manager is the last person that you should be asking to assess this prospecting person, because they're going to assess that role based on how they would do it, which is not do it.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Right? Here's how I would do it. I would do a pile of research, and I would wait, and I wouldn't have the instinct to just pick up the phone and call 100 people. I'm going to really be thoughtful about. I mean, that's what an account manager should do. They should be really thoughtful and thinking about the strategic mid to long term of what they want to do with their client. But a prospector needs to get after it, and there's a whole different set of instincts that come with that. And so if you can't have someone who doesn't have that instinct assessing that role. And so I think it's really important to not have people assess the role if they are not really dialed into what you need for instincts and unique strengths in that role, and develop your hiring plan around people who can really think about, this is who I'm looking for.
Absolutely. Well, we're running out of time here, Don, but I'm going to summarize everything that you just said into two statements. We're going to say that you're going to turn weakness into strength, and you're going to turn procrastination into scalability.
That's it. That's it. And it just follow these basic elements, right? But you've got to diagnose, and ultimately, as I said earlier, the problem is not the problem. The problem is you don't know how to think about the problem, right?
Yeah.
You have to think differently about this, and that means you've got to completely transform the way that you're approaching it. Ultimately, if you want to start, and you've got to rethink how you think about this, you've got to diagnose. You've got to diagnose what you have, and you'll start making progress when you start telling yourself the truth.
Yeah.
And the truth
is,
is,
if you're not ready to do that, you ask for help.
Right. You ask for help. I mean, this is a new way of diagnosing your team to dial in, but it's not. We're not psychoanalyzing anyone. We are trying to, as I said at the beginning, it's about being clear on your intentions. I want my team, I believe my team and your teams they want to be successful, they want to do what's best, and they're doing it with the instincts and the skills that they have, and you're setting them up to not be optimal. And you're also setting them up to not be happy. People who are allowed to be themselves, use their natural instincts, really spend more of their time and energy on their unique strengths, are way more engaged, way more productive, way happier employees. And so your intentions
retaining better people.
Absolutely. So diagnose, realize you're not thinking about the problem the right way, and all progress starts by telling the truth about you and how you think about it and about your team. And
awesome,
from there,
John.
You can start to get this thing dialed in.
Thank you so much for all that amazing insight. I'm excited to work with some of our teams with that in mind.
All right, that's it, folks. That's how you can dial your team in, and transform your thinking and your actions. Next time we'll dive into how you can really scale this. Bye for now. Thanks, Mallory.
Thanks so much, Don.